What's up, everybody? This is Brian Davidson, and you are listening to the NIL Spotlight podcast brought to you by NIL Game Plan, your number one source for NIL news and, more importantly, education across all collegiate sports. Let's get after it. Burnett was the longest tenured commissioner in the history of the Southland Conference. He was also the 2022 NCAA Division I's basketball committee chair. Basically, he oversaw March Madness and the Final Four. As a conference commissioner, he navigated media rights negotiations, governance reform, revenue distribution, oversight, and championship administration, gaining firsthand insight into both policy, recruiting, finance, and athlete development. When NIL transformed college athletics, Tom recognized something most families were missing: the gap between the headlines that he saw and what actually applied. Tom formed NIL for Texas Parents. This initiative grew from that recognition. Tom, let's get things started.
Great to be with you, Brian. Excited to visit with you.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about your journey into college athletics and the administration journey that you went through. Where did it begin?
Well, it began a very long time ago, or so it seems. I went to school at Louisiana Tech University, and probably wasn't the best student at one point, and didn't have a lot of direction. But discovered that there was an opportunity to work within the athletic department there at Louisiana Tech at a time when women's basketball was kind of the UConn of its day. We had a basketball player on the men's side named Carl Malone and a Sweet 16 trip. We had a great, what was then 1AA football program. And I discovered that you could work around all of that. And actually, it supported my academics and got me kind of on a track to, begin whatever this became in the end. But that allowed me to do a lot of different things. I later got an opportunity at a conference office, then a second conference office, got a little more responsibility over time, and then had the great privilege and honor of becoming the Southland Conference commissioner in early 2003. And that set me on kind of an additional course to not only lead a great conference and work with some fantastic administrators, coaches, student athletes in the conference, but also to begin kind of a journey into NCAA governance, participation. You had mentioned the basketball committee. I became the first, now FCS, we call it, commissioner to serve as chair of that committee. We went through the challenges of COVID and shutting down the tournament and then bringing it back. And I was very proud to chair the group when we got it back on the road, so to speak, after COVID with the Final Four in New Orleans, where I had really started my career professionally. So it was a great full circle moment for me. I left the conference about that time, wanted to see what else was out there, what else I could do. Got into the consulting world, which kind of indirectly, maybe not purposefully, got me into the NIL space, which is, I know, what we're going to talk about today, but very much unexpected and not intentional at all for me to be where I'm at, helping young people and their families in the NIL and now revenue sharing journey.
Well, before we dive into NIL, just to give it a little bit of context to how big a seismic shift it actually has caused in college athletics. Pre-NIL, what was the biggest change or administrative initiative that you oversaw that really sort of changed the game?
Yeah, I think that being in a conference commissioner seat, I think the thing that we really started to see, gosh, this is now going back probably well over 10 years ago now, but it was really the beginnings of conference realignment and really the disruptive nature of that and how that has impacted, some conferences for the good, others maybe not so good, maybe an adverse impact as well. And we got our fair share of that here in the Southland Conference. And I saw my colleagues and friends across the country starting to experience that as well. And I think in the end, while it was disruptive, I think there's been some time since it started for some reason to come back into that discussion or space, and you're starting to see some people maybe kind of acknowledge, hey, geography is an important aspect of our athletic participation. And I was always very proud to say that, the Southland Conference, and still to this day, even with some additional changes after I left, has remained kind of geographically sound. It refers to itself now, I think this is a great tagline, as a gas tank league. The longest time, this may still be the case, it was the only conference completely centered in the central time zone. So we were always very proud of that. And we felt that that helped our academics. It allowed young people to get back to campus, get to class the next day, perhaps after a road game. And, I think in the end, at least as of now, things are pretty settled for the Southland. But I would also provide this cautionary phrase, realignment never sleeps. I think I saw a note this morning of a team on the West Coast making a change. So it's one of those things that's probably going to continue. I think the aspects of what we're mainly going to talk about today may impact some of that with NIL and rev share and just the general financial situation of campuses out there and conferences as well. So a lot happened, but when I look back, that was something that was very disruptive and probably wasn't on your bingo card when you started working in college athletics.
Yeah, I probably didn't see UCLA join the Big Ten at that point. Well, for talking to you, I know your journey into the NIL world took a little bit of a mental shift. Can you talk about that shift in your thinking and what brought you around into the world of NIL?
Yeah, I was really, when I got into the consulting business in late 2022, uh, I wasn't thinking about NIL at all. It was there. It was actually there when I was, still a commissioner since it began in 2021. So it was there, but I really didn't have any intention of working within that space. And maybe that's just kind of an old traditional way of looking at our business and kind of what we always did. I was a true believer in, I guess what we'd call the grant and aid model. And young people went to college through a wonderful scholarship program that's notably maybe the second largest scholarship program other than the GI Bill historically, that have allowed young people to play sports and earn their degree and go on to lifelong success. So I was really rooted in that. I don't think that's a bad thing, certainly, but as I started to share what I intended to do in the consulting business, which originally was to take what I've learned over 30 plus years and apply that into the marketplace and try to help friends and colleagues and a lot of people I didn't even know at that point. The question I always got was, well, tell us about NIL. What are you doing with NIL? What can you tell us about it? What's your plans with it? And honestly, Brian, I had no plans with it. I was very reluctant, but the question kept coming up. It was unsolicited. People were on and on about NIL, and I figured, well, if I'm getting these questions, it sounds like people might need some help. And then I embarked into what originally was a transactional opportunity, working independently as state law allowed me to, and the NCAA allowed me to, and trying to help some select student athletes, really primarily here in Texas. And that worked out well for a while, but you could start to see things changing. More and more schools were kind of catching up with NIL and what they were going to do with it. Then, of course, we got into the revenue sharing. We had the House agreement that came through, and I just didn't see a pathway on the transactional side, at least, to kind of continue in that mode. But what I did always see from the beginning was because of those original questions and ongoing inquiries, people really need education in this. And here in Texas, we don't largely have high school NIL. We have a very narrow range for it, but it's not like other states where you have open high school NIL. But I felt like because this is Texas, there's a booming population. That's not going to stop. There is heavy, heavy recruiting where I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, also in Houston and really throughout Texas. And I would argue it may be the most recruited area in the country now, maybe in front of Florida and Southern California. But um, I felt there was still a need for education. And that got me into thinking about providing some, what I would call kind of NIL 101 opportunities for families, their young people, coaches, administrators. And in the high schools, they don't spend a lot of time on this because they don't have to. There's
Sure.
nothing requiring them to do this. So, but the people still need the information. And that got me into a lesson plan, which became the formation of a book structure. We put out a book specific for Texas parents and families. We also have another book that's not Texas branded, but where we live, we have an opportunity for branding opportunities in this state that maybe you don't have everywhere. So that's a long-winded answer to how I got to where I'm at, and I'm really excited. I believe we're in the right space, and you've got parents and families who have been involved with every aspect of uh, their young person's athletic and academic opportunities throughout their lives. It just made sense to me that these same parents and families need NIL education either before or during the recruiting process, whether that's someone coming to visit you, watch you play, or you travel to a college campus, a little bit more informed about what you should be asking about. What is this NIL thing I keep hearing about? And tell me about revenue sharing. So, a lot of things have come together that we feel like we're in a great spot and really look forward to the remainder of the spring and as we get into the next academic year.
Let's talk about those state specific laws and nuances a little bit further since you're obviously an expert there. I think it's something that obviously gets overlooked by the national media. Can you talk about what, first of all, why that's so important to pay attention to? And then those broader themes that apply to both Texas student athletes as well as the rest of the country?
Yeah, I think it's important. I don't think there would be anyone who would tell you that anyone wants to prevent a young person from having this opportunity. But as we know, I mean, not just related here in Texas, certainly, but as we know, a long time ago, when the student athlete nomenclature was developed by the NCAA, as part of that is this was really the one group in society that had its name, image, and likeness rights taken away from it. You have yours, I have mine. My neighbors down the street have theirs. They always have. When I was a student, I worked for my school newspaper and got paid, and had that experience early on. And but strangely enough, we had to go through rounds and rounds of litigation to get ourselves to a point where we could maybe see through some of this. And you can go back to Ed O'Bannon, you can go back to Austin, other cases and such, and then we started to see kind of one by one state legislatures going through the process of, hey, wait a minute, this is unfair for athletes, right under our nose in our state, especially when the bordering state, maybe in the same conference, is allowing something that we're preventing our young people from participating in. So, it was just a series of dominoes, as you know, that fell, and but we're still in this kind of hodgepodge of, what applies in Texas may be different across the border in Oklahoma or in Florida or California, and we've still got some things to work through. And some of people still believe that may be federal intervention through Congress. And we're obviously all watching that with great interest as various bills are out there. But, once a legislature, and active attorney generals and such get involved with something, um, what was maybe applicable 40, 50 years ago no longer applies. And we're talking about right now and the recency of the House agreement. There's the Robinson case, I believe, that's going to really address even a larger issue. So there's just so much out there, but ultimately, we've seen the executive order from the president at the White House, and we're not quite, executive orders are not law
Pretty
necessarily, but
flimsy
yeah, yeah.
historically.
And, is that going to hold up long term, or can they build out of that? What a lot of people think is, kind of the direction we should go. But, you can turn right around the other direction and people believe it's a whole different set of circumstances that, need to happen in this space. So, it's crazy. I don't buy into it being the Wild West. I think it's very understandable. I think those who don't spend time in it can find it to be the Wild West or this big mystery, but it's not that complicated. But again, I go back to people need information, they need education. That's what we're trying to provide.
Well, staying on the theme a little bit, not to get too political, do you have any thoughts on the SCORE Act and the issues it's trying to solve? Just in a broader sense, for not necessarily your opinion on a specific aspect.
Yeah, I probably do have some opinions, but we probably have a limited time here, and I'm
That's
not
fair
sure that
enough.
my opinions are really of all that interest. At the end of the day, I'm about student athlete well-being, their success. We want to find the pathway that everyone can agree this is the way it should be. Am I a firm believer in, say, collective bargaining, unionization, some other aspects that we're hearing in the media and perhaps on social media? Certainly, you can find any topic you want, obviously, in this space and any argument you want. But, at the end of the day, I don't know how that fits within the educational context that we, have or have always known. I think there's something else that doesn't get talked about enough is, there's obviously a lot of differences in college sports. At the very highest power level, if we want to call it that, you're going to have the wherewithal, the mechanisms in place, the funding to do some of the things that, have been talked about or we're even experiencing now. You've got another set of schools, maybe at the lower part of Division One and even in the other divisions, um, that just can't do that, and they
Sure.
need to perhaps. I think, in my opinion, if you want my opinion on something, is some of
Would
those
love it.
schools, yeah, need to declare, hey, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to be academic focused. Not that anyone else is not, but we're going to be academic focused. We're not going to chase, this rev share. We're just not capable of doing that. Um, and then you've got this other group in the middle, who's trying to catch the power group, not quite doing that, but they're also a level or two above maybe some others at the lower level. And I hate to use those kind of terms, but that's what we all understand and such. Big school, small school, medium-sized school, call it what you want. But I just feel like there's some opportunity in this space for schools that can't do that to make that declaration, to say we're not going to do this. Now we're still going to do NIL and provide that perhaps, but the revenue sharing, other aspects of this don't work, on our campus, don't work in our conference. Now, it's easy for me to say this because I'm not in the mix anymore. I'm not making decisions on behalf of schools or conference anymore. But, who's going to step up and say, hey, we're not going to do that anymore? A lot of concerns too, at even below that, if you want to call it that, some of these smaller schools, these liberal arts colleges, closing, consolidating, getting rid of athletics. That's really troubling, and that really has an adverse effect, I think, on the entire enterprise. So, there's some aspects of all of these various bills and proposals that, can be seen as positives. Some, I don't know, you scratch your head a little bit on them. But in the end, I think that if people are focused on the well-being of athletes, the future of higher education, where athletics makes an impact, and as we know in our society, it makes a huge impact. I think that's where I want to be. And that's really not an answer maybe to your question, but it's just that I'm trying to find that spot, that sweet spot, so to speak, where we can live with this, we can understand it, we can participate in the opportunity here financially that we haven't seen before, but we can also be grounded in athletics, education, I should say, for athletes and the larger institutions. And again, we don't have all day. We didn't even get to the transfer portal and things like that. That I think are probably bigger issues than NIL.
Well, speaking of actual recruiting, let's dive into that a little further. What do you think the biggest impact NIL has had on recruiting, as well as not just NIL, as well as RevShare? And what do student athletes need to know about that process and how it's changed?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different on the front end than it is maybe after year one or somewhere
Sure. Once you're in the portal, or if you
within your.
choose to be.
Yeah, on the front end, I always remember the phrase that I didn't come up with, but all's fair in love, war, and recruiting, and that's always been the case. And you hear these quips here and there about how we used to have to bring in the cash through the back door. Now we can bring it in through the front door in this new system. That's not exactly correct, but that things that have changed. Probably my bigger issue, and I was starting to see this when I was still commissioner, maybe even before um, full blown NIL and such, as we started to deregulate transfer opportunities. That used to be very restrictive. There was you transfer one time, you have the year in residency. In some cases, you may lose, a year of eligibility as well. Obviously, that went away, and it's hard to even remember that or convince people that's what we used to do. But the recruiting issue that I started to see early on, and I think we see it all the time now, is you know we've just finished a basketball season, and we're now in the portal for both men's and women's basketball. And how many dozens, if not more, programs don't have any players right now, or may have only a handful of players. And, that is troubling, obviously. And, you look at that and you think, well, how can this sustain itself? Well, maybe it can't, but we're trying to figure it out along the way. And that's kind of something we've always done in the NCAA and college athletics. We just kind of figure it out as we go and maybe piece it together as it happens. And I see that occurring now, specific to recruiting. Not only you're recruiting on the front end, you're recruiting your team not only at the end of the season, but throughout the season.
365, 24/7.
Yeah, you're re-recruiting and re-recruiting again. And that is, troubling. And you think about, all of the coaches that we've seen, some high profile coaches who probably left before they should have left some of these roles. And, they will point to things like that it's not only the re-recruiting, but it's dealing with the agents. It's dealing with, that maybe family members and such that are making demands of coaches now that we didn't have a long time ago, or even just a few years ago. So the recruiting issue is troubling. At the same time, as I've mentioned, this enterprise evolves, it changes. This is what we do now. But when you see an entire football, basketball, baseball team, on their way out the door, and then you learn that the opportunities really weren't there. And so many of these young people have probably retired essentially from college athletics. And that's troubling because now we've lost the academic connection. And what we thought we were doing for so long, educating these young people, we lose some of that. And that is troubling, but it's all tied into the same knot or mess or, whatever you want to call it. And recruiting touches all of that.
We used to always tell student athletes and families, you're not making a 4-year decision, you're making a 40-year decision. And it was so important to not just think about athletics, but overall fit, academics, where you want to be, the alumni network you want to join, truly joining a community for life. The portal changes all of that. But at the same time, I worry about those student athletes and their academics. These basketball players that all just entered the portal, in theory, their academic year is still going on right now, and I know that can cause a lot of disruption in terms of just student athletes leaving college without a degree. And that's something that weighs on me.
Yeah, it's troubling, certainly. And again, I kind of go back to, okay, where can I help people in this, or where can others help people? And it's in that parent space somewhere. And that's been bouncing around my head for a long time. Is these ultimate influencers, and it may not be a traditional two-parent household. It may be a family. It may be a grandmother. It may be others in an extended family, or friends that we're talking about here when I refer to parents and families that have had that sway or influence over a young person and can help them with some longer term decisions. I'm sure there's a flip side of that as well that may not be as beneficial. And you may not have people around you who, went to college or experienced academic success, and thus they don't know that, and they may be, the people that are, of influence here. So, that's something you think about as well. But what can we be doing to help? The elders, so to speak, of these young people better understand what's going on out there, as opposed to, hey, I hear about this star athlete who's making $4 million. Where's mine? That's really not what this is about. You and I both know that kind of the average NIL deal is, I think I saw something recently, might have been around $40, you know, and I'm not sure. I wouldn't quote that necessarily, but it's
I
not a
think you're about
lot.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
not a lot of money. And even if there's not a lot of money in NIL, can we be doing some things that better educate young people about, financial literacy? What's ahead of you? When I was 18 or 19, while I wasn't playing college sports, there was really no one to tell me about any of that. I was probably closer to 30 or so and well into my professional career when, I started to, realize, hey, I need to be investing. I need to be socking it away for when I'm 60 and older. And, to get that opportunity, at 18, 19, 20 years old, I wish I had those 10 years back early on in my own personal journey. But, even if they don't get NIL, they don't get revenue sharing, can we set them up and help their families, reemphasize the opportunities, financially that they need to have for the rest of their lives?
Well, I think that speaks to an understanding and some education around taxes, something I never thought about when I was 18 for sure. The idea of even starting an LLC when you're 17 or 18 or maybe even early as 16. Do you have a general message to the student athletes and families that are beginning this process and that financial literacy process, and where they should start and the different aspects they should be thinking about?
Well, it's hugely important. And I think some of the things in our lesson plan, so to speak, within our book as well, is certainly, having that awareness of what financial literacy includes and what it means for you going forward. It's not necessarily about what are you going to do with your $1 million, because again, that's not the reality here. But it's about setting up a program where you document everything. You start to learn how to organize yourself financially. Yes, paying taxes is hugely important. Obviously, this is going to be treated as self employment income that will be taxed, certainly above a certain dollar amount. And in some states, you've got the addition of state income taxes, things like that. So you've got to be aware of that. And one of my greatest fears is I'm I feel good about not seeing a lot of this, but I just wonder and fear how many of our student athletes across the country may not be paying attention to this, may not, be getting the advice they need on tax payments and such. I had someone say, well, what we do see out there, and these are people from campus involved in recruiting, and this is really unfortunate to hear, but it may be a reality, is that these young people aren't paying attention to that. And then they realize they've got a big tax bill coming up. And what I've heard in some of the transfer behavior is that the next school or the next agent will help negotiate, um, an opportunity for you to transfer and have your tax bill remedied by that next school. That's troubling as well, obviously, because now we're just chasing, money, and perhaps I hope that's not true, but when you hear it, nothing surprises you anymore. And when you see these young people go from school to school to school to school, you know, um, why are they doing that? Is it
Sure.
just to get the next amount of money? It certainly can't be for academic reasons. It's not going to lead to a great outcome as far as being a reliable, uh, fondly thought of alum of a school. If you're at school two and year two and year three and so on and so forth. So those are certainly concerns, but that core financial literacy education, including taxes, um, coming up with a game plan, so to speak, on how to address that. Hugely important, but I will fully acknowledge not every family, not every group of parents is well versed in that. And that's where maybe we can help, begin something special with a young person and set them on the right path financially.
Well, we just touched on agents and their role in this process. Traditionally, as both your high school coach as well as your parents, and that relationship has never been uh, always easy. It changes from situation to situation. And now we're adding another layer into that relationship. At the same time, it's probably a good thing that student athletes are getting legal representation since they are actually signing contracts. As you just said, there can be another side to things where an agent is helping maybe facilitate a move that's in their best interest and not the student athletes. Do you have a message for the student athletes going through this process and how they should think about uh, these older people that they should be getting typically mentored by? They're very young in their lives, and it's the first time they're very impressionable, and they're going through this for the first and only time.
Yeah, it's a great question and another area of concern when you speak to the differences between professional sports and collegiate sports. And the professional sports, the players' associations and the leagues have determined the exact role, conduct, perhaps restrictions in the agency space. And in college sports, we simply don't have that requirement. And you're hearing these outrageous, demands of agents who want upwards to maybe 20, 25%. I don't know, maybe higher than that of a young person's earnings, which is, just not fair to anyone involved. And, when I talk to university administrators and conference officials, that is more common than you think it is. So it's very troubling to learn that, look, if you're a licensed attorney or perhaps have some level of certification, license, in that agency space, look, you're probably looking out for the best interest of the young person. But you hear these things, and again, you can't, you don't know if they're real or not. But one university administrator told me, the issue we've got in our program, and this is probably the case everywhere. Every young person has an Uncle Ray, and Uncle Ray is looking for his, and he's not looking for something 10 years down the road. He may be looking for his right now. And I don't mean to disparage all the wonderful Uncle Rays out there that don't do any of this, but you do hear that, and that is troubling beyond belief. So, that is something that I don't have the answer to right now, but I think in the end, there has been some legislation proposed about restricting kind of agent representation, commission percentages, whatever that might be going forward, and maybe that is something that we do see legislatively in the future. But until we do, we're going to have these issues.
Well, putting your conference commissioner hat back on, what sort of infrastructure or rules or help or role can the conferences play in helping to bring, I don't want to say order, but clarity to the ever changing landscape?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, conferences have always had the opportunity to create more restrictive, if you want to use that term, policies in place. And, you're hearing about that in some other conversations, maybe not in this space, but maybe a power conference deciding, well, maybe what our national association is telling us we can or can't do, that doesn't sit well with us. We may develop our own rules and do something very different. That can happen. It can certainly happen in this space as well. I think my concern as a former commissioner, and you've asked me to put that hat back on. So my concern is, are we just moving the target away from a national association onto a conference, onto a group of schools that honestly, wouldn't have the wherewithal to withstand, potential litigation that, you already see the national associations paying for. You see a lot of the large conferences not only paying large legal bills, but they have a tremendous lobbying effort in both Washington and probably in some state capitals as well. So there's just my concern was always, as a mid-major conference, are we just moving the target onto ourselves as opposed to honestly letting our national association take the slings and arrows in this space with the wherewithal, with the revenue opportunity to you manage some of that. But that can't continue forever either.
Okay. Well, Tom, wrapping things up a little bit, can we just zoom out a little bit? Your overall message to students, athletes, and families going through this process, usually for the first time. What do they need to
Yeah,
consider? Where should they start getting educated? What are the broader themes that they need to really think about?
yeah, that's a great question. I think what we're trying to at least present is, you can look at it, you can, rattle off your mission, your vision. Obviously, what you want to do is kind of operate within a group of values here, and we're just looking to provide clarity where in some cases there's very little or none at all, and really trying to develop or inform people really of the policies that are out there and how they can act on it. They don't have to assume anything based on second, third hand information, hearsay, they heard somebody else was doing. They can get some good, honest, goodness, uh, you know, uh, advice, direction, understanding that it takes into account state law, NCAA, now the College Sports Commission at the Division I level at least, as well as the other governing bodies as well. I think with anything you do, you've got to address it with, the integrity, the character, the background that you've built over time. You know, I'm all about really being focused on a young person's development, their academics, the right fit at a college, what they should be doing as opposed to what's forced upon them. I think too that, we want to make sure that all Texas parents, in our case, whether what we're doing, have accessibility to any and all information. And if you were to go online, you can find some of it. You may not be able to find all of it. Again, we've tried to narrow our focus, our niche, so to speak, on what those Texas parents and families should be doing. Although I will quickly tell you that what we're addressing as a Texas issue is really universal. What we
Sure.
have in our Texas publication really applies anywhere. And honestly, um, I don't know what the percentages would be, but a large number of our Texas high school athletes are going to go play college sports elsewhere outside of the state. That's always been the case. And there's just so many opportunities in this state. And you may go to Oklahoma or California or Georgia or wherever you go. So there's an opportunity elsewhere. But we just feel like that, we've got the opportunity to provide these Texas families. I'm a recent college parent myself. And there were a lot of things, even though I had gone to college, that when my youngsters went to college, maybe I forgot about it or wasn't thinking about it or something changed on me. And I wasn't well versed when my young person asked me about this. We don't want that to be the case with NIL, with rev share, with whatever's coming next around the corner in college athletics. And we know there's going to be something and probably multiple things going forward. We just want to do our best part to, help people understand, learn, be educated, create the best opportunity they can for their young people.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Where can we send people to learn about you and your organization?
Yeah, sure, Brian. Thank you for having me. Number one, we've got a website set up. It's very simply, it's NIL for TexasParents.com. It's pretty straightforward. It talks a little bit about, the pillars we're working within, our mission, our vision, the values we have, as well as information on our book, which is, pardon the commercial here, but it's available on Amazon.com. Again, simply titled NIL for Texas Parents. We do have a second book that if you just look up Tom Burnett, you can find my second book as well that does not have the Texas branding there. So we're looking to build something, really special, very genuine, very intentional to help, parents and families.
Appreciate it, Tom. Thanks for coming on NIL Spotlight.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for listening to the NIL Spotlight podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to visit nilgameplan.com to get started on your NIL journey for free. We'll see you next week.